Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Phoenix Wisdom Podcast. I am your host, Janet Sandberg. I am a soul interpreter, divine channel, Reiki master teacher, intuitive coach, author, and of course, podcast host with over 35 years of expertise. I help people move from the confusion and chaos of life into clarity and confidence by connecting them to their soul's purpose and passions, helping you rebuild your life with meaning and purpose. Today, I am joined by Laverne Friesen. Laverne, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
I am excited to hear your story. Always think it's a little bit, I don't want to say more meaningful, but when men come on the show to talk about it, because the mental health stigma, while it's widespread for everybody, it's a little bit extra for men. So I'm extra interested and honored that you are here sharing your story. So let's learn a little bit about you. Tell us about yourself.
I'm Laverne. I'm a dad. I'm a man trying to be the best I can. I'm very much into personal growth. It wasn't always that way though. And I identify as a cycle breaker. I'm here to break some generational cycles. And I recently discovered that I'm here to help other people break their cycles as well. So that's who
Awesome.
I am.
Good. Yeah. I am also a cycle breaker, and it's kind of a sucky job, but it's important.
It's hard.
It is. It is. And for the people listening, if you're not familiar with the term cycle breaker, it's, stuff that's been happening in your family generationally, just over and over again. And then suddenly you're the one who figures it out. And you're the one who's like, I'm not going to keep this going. I'm going to end this, for my kids, for future generations. We don't need to keep living this way with these traumas or whatever they are that just sort of keep getting passed down from generation to generation. But it's really hard work to not only recognize it, that's sort of the first hurdle, but then to do the work to heal and to change things.
And it's very isolating because you're often labeled the black sheep as well, right? So
Yeah, because you're calling people out in your
yeah.
family. Even if it's, generations and generations past and those people are no longer around, it's still you ruffle some feathers.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I found that out too.
Yeah, I ruffled I have ruffled feathers with the living, but the coolest thing that ever happened to me was those that have passed on actually came back to watch and have told me that they never learned how to do this while they were
Mhm.
alive, and they're very invested in my journey, and that has
Amazing.
given me a lot of strength. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, we know so much more now than we ever have about, you know, the way we think, the way we feel, the way life affects us and all of that. And people back then didn't know. It was just, suck it up and keep going, and that's all they knew how to do. But anyways, let's get into your story a little bit more. Tell us what life was like when it was really dark.
Well, it sucked.
What was going on then? What made it suck?
Well, I have to set it up. So I was born into a very large family. I have 8 siblings. My parents were and still are part of a very fundamentalist religious group that some call a cult. There was no freedom in thought or belief there. In addition to that, my mom was very physically violent and emotionally violent. And so I was picked on quite a bit. I guess I was the scapegoat child. I received a lot of violent beatings and punishment for things that I hadn't done or things that my siblings were never punished for. Um, and I had this deep sense of unworthiness instilled in me, and
Yeah,
I became a people pleaser, trying to, please everybody to, just to prevent the next beating, if nothing
of
else. Right? It
course. Yeah.
became a coping mechanism for me. In addition to that, I was sexually assaulted, and then so when I was 9 years old, I was sexually assaulted. And then after I had already told my parents about that, I was brought back to that same location, and the inevitable happened again.
Oh my god.
And yeah, and so fear that I felt as that 9-year-old child being re-victimized and being physically abandoned created a very deep abandonment wound within me. Yeah, and I was emotionally abandoned all the time as well. So there's kind of like this deep abandonment wound that I've been dealing with ever since I realized it was there. And
Mhm.
there's so many different layers to it, and the levels of unworthiness, like not just with the violence that I experienced in the home, but being abandoned like that when they knew, I guess little boy Laverne realized or believed that he wasn't worth saving, right? And
Yeah.
it took many years before I came along to save myself. So I that was my childhood. I left home when I was 16. I went and lived with relatives. Not, it was a better situation, but it wasn't healthy by any means. And I started when I was of age, I started pursuing a career in law enforcement, uh, or as a first responder. I wasn't sure whether if I wanted to go as a paramedic or in law enforcement. And I
Mhm.
decided I didn't want to be responsible for whether people lived or not. And so I decided to go into law enforcement. I got into law enforcement I, when I was 27. I started on a highway patrol unit, and it's funny. It's not funny. I don't know. Um, Everybody knows that if you're writing tickets, a lot of speeding tickets or whatever, people that you're going to run across people that aren't happy to see you. And I didn't realize it until a lot later, but that always really affected me because I was a people pleaser. And
And you're doing
so,
exactly the opposite of pleasing people.
yeah, yeah, I, I believed in what I was doing, like you making communities safe or whatever. But anytime somebody was well, nobody was ever happy to see me, and that wore me down quite a bit actually. And so I did that for 5 years, and then I went and worked in the oil and gas sector for a while as a private contractor. And my then wife was pregnant with our second child, and I had promised her that I would be home before he was born. And so I went back. I found a law enforcement job in a city, and we moved to that city. I started the job, and our son was born. And I believed I was living the best life possible. Granted, I had a very narrow vision of what life should be,
Mhm.
how good life could be. But I was married. I had a young family. We had a nice house in a good neighborhood, and I had a good job. And so I thought that I was living my best life.
Ticked all the
And
boxes.
yeah, and as a child, I was a chubby child, and I got body shamed a lot, and by my own family actually as well. And
Mm.
so I always had body image issues. And I was at that time, I was in the best physical shape I'd ever been in my life. So I literally thought I was ticking all the boxes. And then in 2017, I was involved in an incident with probably the most irrational person I've ever dealt with. And to make matters worse, he took a picture of me, posted it to social media, and
Mm.
then filled the comments with veiled threats towards me. But the worst part about it was I knew where he lived, and he lived just right around the corner from me.
Oh my god.
And yeah, and am a very active father. And so I was pretty worried, and I couldn't drive past his house even if I was on duty in uniform. I couldn't do it. I was too scared. And I took steps to protect myself, bought a camera system for the house. And about a week later, I had my first ever anxiety attack when I saw him, and he never saw me. I saw him, and I was on duty in uniform. And if I should be confident and feeling safe, that would be the
Mhm.
time. I had my first anxiety attack. Couple so But I did what I had always done in my career, and I just let time kind of take care of it. And I thought that had kind of dealt its or ran its course.
Mhm.
And what I didn't realize is that actual incident had injured me. And about 2 months afterwards, I was put in a position where I started having the most fun that I ever had at work, and I was loving life again. And then within like 3 weeks, I got assigned a project that I didn't believe I could complete. It was a monumental task, and to make it worse, my supervisors told me that I was the only person in the department that could actually accomplish this. And so I put a lot of stress on myself. And over the summer months, I started getting irritable. And then I started getting angry. And then I started experiencing rage. And what I didn't realize at the time was my old abandonment wound was starting to surface because I felt abandoned by my management team with this project. And then I was I'm a people pleaser, so I'm putting extra stress on myself.
Mhm.
And so the initial instant was in March. And by October, I had to go on a stress leave. And the stigma of mental health for me at that time, just to consider a short stress leave,
Yeah.
took it took me 2 months about thinking about it while everything was getting worse. So I went on a stress leave. I went for 3 weeks, came back. I didn't feel any better. The first thing I did was yell at one of my supervisors, and should have been a red flag because that wasn't who I was.
Yeah.
Uh, but you just kind of, when you don't have any knowledge about mental health, you just do what you're doing, right? You kind of go, and that's what I was doing. And then a couple months after that, this supervisor on my shift left, and my management team told me that they weren't going to hire any more supervisors, but I was already the de facto leader. And so there I've got all this extra stress on me, right? And about a month after that, I crashed. I had nothing left in the tank. I was apathetic. I didn't do any work anymore. I would just drive around all day, drink coffee. That was my day. Nobody questioned it either. Nobody
Hmm.
mentioned it. And to me, it was a drastic change in who I was, but nobody seemed to notice. I still don't know why that is. And then I started not being able to sleep. So it started with mostly work nights, nights before work or my shift. And then it was most of the time, and I couldn't sleep. And I was taking up to 5 times the recommended dose of a sleep aid, just trying to get to sleep, and I couldn't sleep. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I was falling into a major depressive episode. And all I knew is that my world started to close in around me. Everything just started to get narrower. And I just felt like I was being suffocated kind of by
Mhm.
life in general. I didn't have any emotions during this time. My son was about 1 years old, and he was I was sitting on the couch. He was tugging at my pant leg, and he was like, "Daddy, daddy, daddy," and he was smiling. And I looked down at him, and I didn't feel anything.
Oh.
And I'm like, "Man, I should be like happy right now." But I had no idea. I had started seeing a counselor, but I was self-stigmatizing what I was going through, and I was lying to myself about how bad it was. So she
Yeah.
couldn't help me, right? She couldn't help
Mhm.
me. She didn't know the truth, right? So I couldn't sleep, which obviously wreaked havoc on my mental health. And I started becoming suicidal. I started thinking like, there's nothing, I can't get out of this. I don't know how to get out of this. And I would just lay in bed at night and just ruminate about how horrible my life was. It just made everything worse. And it got to the point where I was planning my own demise every night, and I was just thinking it over and over and over. And I had everything planned out. I had all the steps planned out. I had everything figured out. And I like to say that I was saved by a 3-year-old angel, because my daughter was 3 years old at the time, and she had been sleeping in her own bed. And every night during that time frame, she would wake up, she would come to our bed, and she would cuddle in beside me. And she was small enough, she'd put her head in my armpit and just cuddle in, and she would fall right back asleep. And so every night while I'm laying there
Oh my
thinking about my
gosh.
own demise, I would feel her beside me, and I would listen to her breathing, and I'd be like, I can't do this. Like I have to find a way to get through this. But I didn't know how. And I've worked with some guys in my career that were active in peer support, and they'd always said, if you're ever suffering, experiencing anything, just call anytime. And the closest I ever came was starting to text a message at 3 in the morning, and then I deleted it because I
Mhm.
was too scared. I was too scared about how I'd be perceived. Working in law enforcement, I know what happens when somebody says they're suicidal. What I didn't realize is there's this spectrum of suicidality, and like I didn't want to die. And
Yeah.
somebody could I didn't, I wouldn't have been that person that ended up at the emergency room in handcuffs, right? But I was too scared of how it would look, and so
Yeah.
I never told anybody. But my daughter's sleeping beside me every night. I knew I had to do something. And so there was one person in my life that I thought could help me, that I trusted to help me. And so I went to them and I told them how bad my life was, or how bad it was. And my message wasn't received. And so I blamed myself. But I went back a few days later and I told this person again. And I laid it out. And they looked at me in the eye and they said, I know. And then they walked out of the room. I
Mm.
know. Yeah. Yeah. They,
Wow, that's not an
as
abandonment trigger at all, is it?
no, right?
My gosh.
But because I was such a people pleaser, I had surrounded myself with people that were just stealing my energy.
Yeah,
They weren't, there were, at that specific time in my life, there was nobody close to me that was helpful, was there for a mutual
right.
relationship, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I didn't know how. I knew I had to try to fight to stay alive. I didn't know how I was going to do it. And is, kind of often the case with people who suffer declining mental health. There's always some kind of interactions at work that are negative. And so I decided to make things better. And I filed a complaint with human resources. Had been an incident that had actually made me feel for my safety within the workplace.
Oh, no.
I filed a complaint. The union and I went to this big meeting with human resources and our management, and they asked me what was wrong, and I just started crying, and I couldn't talk, and I had to leave the room for about 5 minutes. And when I came back, I was angry and hostile, and told them what was wrong, and told them how they had to do it because there was legislation they weren't following, and nobody came up to me and offered me help or asked me how I was doing. And during that time, I was going through outbursts in the office. I was not my normal self. I yelled at people. I remember one day there was like three supervisors in the office, and I was yelling at them about how the workplace sucked and how I couldn't do it anymore. Yet nobody came to me and asked me how I was doing. Nobody reached out. And for me, I was screaming inside. I'm like,
Yeah.
someone,
And outside.
please. Yeah, yeah, literally, right? I'm dropping F bombs in the office. I'm like yelling at people. That's not who I am. But yet nobody's reaching out for help. And so I had no idea what I was gonna do. To me, I was crying for help,
Yeah.
and nobody was answering. And I had no idea what I was going to do. And my someone had informed me that legislation was changing, and that so now we're in like March, April, May of 2018,
Okay.
and this had started in March of 2017. So now we're a year in,
Yeah.
and it's probably the worst year of my life, or most definitely. And they told me that in September of 2018 there was some kind of new policy with the Workmen's Compensation Board, where if I went off under a psychological injury, I could get 100% salary top up or whatever it was. And so I started setting this goal that I had to stay alive until September.
Mhm.
And I had no idea how I was going to do it.
That's like
And
6 months.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And, you know, house payment or mortgage and everything. So I couldn't go, entry level or a minimum wage job. I had to find a good job, and I had no idea what I was going to do. And but an agency near where I lived posted a position, and so I applied for it, and I somehow got the position. And to me, even though I knew like something was so wrong for me and some was so broken, I think it shows to a degree how well we can hide stuff.
Right? Yeah,
And
like, you went
so,
through the whole interview process and
yeah,
everything, and you were what's the word I'm
yeah,
looking for? Impressing people.
yeah. And
Yeah.
like I've always had really good references, but the last 3, 6 months, like nobody could have honestly given me a reference, right? Like anyway, so I did that when I gave my resignation notice. My manager came up to me and he said, "We've just kind of left you alone." And like I was stunned. I wanted to scream at him. I'm like, "I've been crying for help for so long and you just left me alone." Is the guy going to get up at my funeral and say that? Yeah, we just left Laverne alone.
Yeah.
Like, anyway. So, and he was in the meeting where I had been crying and couldn't talk and was angry. So I think that's kind of the old school mentality. Like
Yeah.
that's part of the
Just give
reason
him
I talk.
space and
Yeah.
he'll figure it out and he'll be
Yeah.
okay.
Or he'll start drinking or something. He'll become an alcoholic. That'll be good for him.
Yeah. That'll fix
Um,
everything.
yeah. So I started the new position for the new organization and I thought that everything should be better. And it
Sure.
wasn't. I was a little bit happier, but I wasn't suicidal anymore, which was good. But my anxiety was through the roof. And I didn't realize it was anxiety because I came to find out later I had been living with anxiety my whole life.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. So I thought everything would get better, but it didn't. And then about 2 months into that job, I was the first on scene to a three vehicle collision on a rural highway. And I got there. This couple comes up to me. They have some young kids, and the kids are crying. And the kids are physically fine. Like I can see it, they're not hurt, but they're
Mhm.
crying. And at this point in my career, I've been to a couple hundred collisions, whatever it might have been. And I'd always been calm and, that cold or the calm professional. And as soon as I got out of my vehicle and I saw these kids, I couldn't talk to them. I was crying. I was about to cry. I got a lump in my throat. My mind started racing. I didn't really realize it, but I was experiencing some tunnel vision. I said something to them. They seemed happy. I have no idea what it was. I went to check on the other vehicles. There was, like I said, there was three vehicles involved, and I only saw the third one when I walked right up to it. I didn't know.
Oh my
Like,
gosh.
yeah, I didn't know it was there. There was a lady that was trapped in the vehicle. I couldn't talk to her. I couldn't even comfort her, let alone try to do first aid. I found a girl in the back seat. She was not injured, just scared and crying. She was close to the same age as my daughter, and I really wanted to comfort her, but I couldn't because I would have been sitting there crying with her. And so I kind of just went off to the side and watched, pretended to be busy until the fire department got there. And I was pretty scared at that point because I believed I was broken. I believed that I was
Yeah.
done. Right.
Yeah.
I didn't know what was wrong, and I believed I was broken. But I want to share part of the story because while I was there, standing there thinking about how broken I was watching a firefighter that I knew, and he was doing his job, and he was skilled, and he was calm, and the epitome of a professional. And I was just like, man, I wish that was me. I used to be that guy. I wish that was me. And I was very envious of him. A few months later, he died from suicide.
Oh my gosh.
Right. So the
So he
two
was
of us,
hiding it too.
he was hiding it very well. Right.
Yeah.
And, we never know who's suffering or how hard and fast it's going to come on or
Mhm.
how they hide it. And, I was there sitting there broken. I just spent 4 or 5 months being suicidal, and I thought I was broken, this broken person, and little did I know, right?
Yeah.
um so after that, I was scared. I drove home, and I after my shift I finally that was the catalyst where I was like, I got to take this serious. Something, it's not going to get better on its own. I really have to deal with this. And I found a psychologist who only sees first responders, which is really important because in that world, you don't really trust people to understand because you view the world differently because you see all this trauma. You
Yeah.
don't really trust people, right?
Yeah.
And then I think for me, especially, I had to find someone like that because my emotions and my voice had been suppressed my whole life.
Mhm.
And I really had to find somebody that I believed could trust or would help me.
Yeah.
Especially having told somebody how bad it was and them leaving the room, that just made it worse,
Mhm.
obviously. It took me a couple months to get in to see her. It took me the first day I went to see her, it took me 20 minutes to drive to her office, and I cried the whole way because I knew I was gonna get help.
Just relief.
I'm feeling the emotion now, and that was 5 years ago. Yeah, and then I sat in her office. My appointment was for an hour, and I sat and cried in her office for 2. And
Gosh.
she, at some point in there, she leaned over, she put her hand on my knee, and she said, "You're not alone." And that was so powerful, and
Yeah.
it took me a while to actually believe it, but
Mhm.
that's why I talk about mental health publicly because the stigma almost killed me, and it's so ridiculous because we all suffer at some level at some point,
Yeah.
and I didn't really believe it until I think it was about 6 months after I'd been in therapy. I went to the courthouse, and there was a, retired police officer there who defends traffic tickets, cheaper than a lawyer. You could hire him, he
Yeah.
goes in, defends your ticket, and as soon as I walked in and he saw me, he left the conversation he was in, and he said, "Hey, I need to talk to you for a little bit." And we went into this private room, and he says, "What's going on?" And of course, I'm still dealing with stigma, right? And I
Mhm.
feigned ignorance. And
Talking about.
fine, like nothing happening here. But he told me, he's like, "Listen, I have PTSD. I know that something's going on." And then he told me the story of his injury and how he got through it. And that was nothing short of a hug from the universe
Yeah.
because now I actually felt and believed that I was not alone. And it's so amazing. And that's why we all have to be more cognizant of this because there's so many people that are suffering, but it only seems to be like the people that have experienced that reach out voluntarily.
Yeah. They're the ones
And
who recognize the signs.
yes, and it's important for us to be those people because like when I was suffering the most suicidal days, somebody could have come up to me and said, "Hey, how are you doing?" But if I didn't trust them, I would have never told them,
Oh, yeah. "Oh,
right? So you have
fine. Everything's
yeah,
great."
you have to be that person that people will trust, and that's why I talk about it. And I think that's why I never texted that guy, the coworker that it was a peer supporter, because
Mhm.
I'd never heard his story. I didn't know for 100% that he would understand and help me. In hindsight, I know he would have helped me. I
Yeah.
know he would have helped me if I'd have sent that message, but I didn't know it then. And that's who we have to be all the time is let people know we're that safe place. One of the more surprising things about my story for me anyway, I knew that my childhood trauma had affected my mental health. I knew that I always suspected there would be a correlation. There were times in my life that I suspected, like, I wonder if I've dealt with all that, right? Like,
Right.
because a lot of times we have trauma that we don't really recognize as trauma.
Mhm.
I knew I had a traumatic childhood,
Yeah.
and I would hear stories about people talking about how they had a mental health crash when they were 40 or 50, and they traced it back to their childhood. So I always kind of wondered, like, I wonder if I've been, dealt with that, which I clearly hadn't. But so we did some EMDR therapy, and this changed my life. We did EMDR therapy, traced it back. Do I need to explain EMDR therapy?
Yeah, just in case people listening don't
Yeah.
know.
So it's eye movement, reprocessing, you know, eye movement, reprocessing, and
What's the D? Something.
desensitization.
Ah,
Eye movement, desensitization, reprocessing. So basically, you reprogram your mind with, or reprogram memories. Lots of eye movement. And so, what happens during it? So, what happened? She sat me down in front of this little screen. It's got a little dots or whatever that go back and forth at different speeds. And she's like, "What is the one thing that's bothering you the most right now?" And so you think about it, then you feel that sensation in your body. And then she asked me to feel it the first, or to remember the first time I felt it. And the first time I'd felt that was the time I was sexually assaulted the second time, where
okay.
the big abandonment wound happened. And so we go through that, and there's a lot of tears and releasing. And at the end of the session, she asks me, "Now name some, or say something good from that came from that." And the answer for me was instantaneous. I'm a better dad now because of it.
Wow.
And that changed my life because I realized that this horrible stuff had happened to me, but I was a better dad now. And to 38-year-old or 39-year-old Laverne, being a good dad was like the most important thing. And it was to me at that time. It's not to me today, because today I want to be the best person I can be, which then makes me the best dad I can be.
Absolutely. Yes.
Right. And so that was the start of my healing journey. There was a lot of forgiveness that had to be worked through. Um, there's just there's just so much shit that had to be dug up. But yeah, that's kind of the main part of my story. It's always evolving. There's always something happening, seems like, that initiates some more healing. But that was kind of the big one that kind of really turned my life around and sent me in a different direction.
And how are you doing now?
I I'm doing amazing.
Excellent.
I So after that, all of that, I was in therapy. I got a divorce shortly after that. People grow and change and heal,
Mhm.
and sometimes relationships break down because of that. And then a couple of years after the separation, everything kind of came to a head, and my psychologist told me I needed to go find a happier job.
Okay.
And so I left law enforcement, and now I'm a peer support coordinator. And so each of those steps, like through the divorce and through the career change, helped me a lot. Just over 2 years ago, met someone that seemed different. And the reason I thought she was different was because she had actually done some healing herself. So she seemed weird to me, or different, right? We started a relationship, and she helped me through the whole process of, leaving law enforcement. And for the first time in my adult life, I experienced unconditional love and support from someone. And it was an amazing feeling. But a few months ago, she broke up with me, and it was a shock to me. And I was heartbroken.
Yeah.
But for the first time in my life, I decided to do the right thing and deal with it the right way. Within an hour of her leaving my house, I wrote in my journal that I was going to embrace the pain and I was going to feel all of it. And I did. And it's the most amazing thing I've ever done. And if you haven't done it, you probably think I'm crazy if you're listening, but it literally is the most amazing thing you can do, because I found that a lot of my heartbreak from that relationship ending was my inner child pain. Because as an adult, I could logically see that, yes, we had this really good relationship, but it had ran its course,
Yeah.
and we had both helped each other quite a bit in that relationship. And I speak more for myself. I was very grateful for what she was able to, show me and teach me and provide me during that relationship. But And I came to that, I could see that really soon after the breakup, especially with my journaling, but there was still a lot of pain involved. And that's when I started digging and realizing how much attention my inner child needed. And man, yeah, like I soaked quite a few pages of my journal with my tears, and
Mhm.
I just sat and cried and released some of that. And I'm the happiest I've ever been. I could say that within a month or two of this breakup. And but when you we're so scared to face the pain because we think it's going to be so scary,
Yeah,
but yet it's
exactly.
so amazing when you do. And so yeah, what happened was kind of surprising. I did that 3 months after the breakup. I had changed my life so much that, so 2 days after the breakup, i'm I'm attuned to the second level of Reiki as well.
Awesome.
And yeah, which was a life-changing experience in its own. So my Reiki master teacher, 2 days after the breakup, told me that I needed to honor myself. And she told it to me in a very kind of narrow context, but nobody had ever told me to honor myself before.
Hmm.
And I'm like, wait, what? And I started honoring myself and honoring everything I did. And my whole life changed so drastically.
Wow.
Like, I'm always been physically active, but I always had a horrible diet because I was an emotional eater. I was
Yeah.
always trying to like soothe myself with eating.
Mhm.
Well, I probably lost 20 pounds in 3 months, the first 3 months, because I was honoring what I was doing. And there's obviously more steps to what I was doing, but I
Yeah.
I, I did all the things that I'd learned since I first went to therapy, and I put them together. I did all of them. My life changed so much. I became happy. And I thought I'd been happy before, but like, I guess you never really know till you
Yeah.
reach another level, right?
Yeah.
And I personally believe there's more levels to go. So yeah, and the surprising thing out of that was I developed a course, and I'm like, oh, I'm just going to sell this course online, what I did, and do some stuff on the side. And then I realized that no, I can't do that because this is my energy. I have to coach people through it.
Mm.
And so I started coaching people through it, and that has been, well, it brought up some more inner child stuff because when you put
Sure.
yourself out there, right?
Yep.
You put yourself out there, you're like, oh, I didn't know I had this feeling of unworthiness still left,
Mhm.
or whatever it is, right? And every person that's a coach that I've talked to about that has said, oh yeah, when you put yourself out there, you got to deal with some stuff. But yeah, it's been a hell of a ride. And as horrible some of the incidents in my life have been, know that I went through them to get the experience and the wisdom so that I could help other people.
Yep.
And I'm grateful for that. And there are times in meditation and just walking around and stuff that I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for some of these events in my life because of who they've made me be.
Right.
And it's just the me of I don't know, 7 years ago would would never believe it, right? I was stuck in victimhood for a long time.
Mhm.
30, it was my mid 30s before I even kind of started realizing that some of those bad things had helped me. But
Yeah. Yeah. And that we can when you sort of finally realize what's going on and why we're at the spot that we're at, that's when we get to choose. I can stay here or I can do the work and get better.
yeah.
Um, and both ways are a challenge for different reasons, but
Yeah.
at least, when you choose to do the work and try to heal, at least you know that things will get better eventually. But it's also
Yeah.
interesting what you said about like feeling the pain, feeling the feels. I think that's what keeps a lot of us stuck in depression is because we have all of these big, big feelings and we're terrified to feel them. So we just don't. And then we're just
Mhm.
numb. And that's basically depression, right?
Yeah.
And we just have to allow ourselves to feel the feelings and then say thank you and thank you, next, let them move on
Yeah. Yeah.
and keep doing that. And yeah, journaling is a great way to process the feelings and be like, ah,
Yes.
what is all this pain? Sometimes you don't have to. Sometimes you're just
Yeah.
like feeling, I recognize it, I can name it, I can feel it, do all the crying or whatever, and
Yeah.
then let it go. And that I think is a big part of healing from depression. It certainly has been for me, not white Anglo-Saxon Protestant home where you don't have feelings. And it's not just that you don't talk about them, you just don't have them. So I never did anything. I was trained not to feel the feelings and not to talk about the feelings. And yeah, so then weird. I was depressed most of my life.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
it's still scary, even though it's a road, the healing journey. And we were talking about this earlier this week with a couple different people. Like you're never done. It's you just peel back layers and consistently find new levels of happiness and freedom and yeah.
I agree. It's just, well, every time I ever thought, so when I first started therapy, it would get to the point where like I'm so good, right? And then something
Mhm.
else would come along and put me back in my place. And then so I quickly learned to never think that I was good, right? And now it's just there's just so many layers. But every layer, I don't know, I think every layer brings you closer to your true soul self. Your soul is, light and divine and joy. And that's why every layer of healing you're happier. Um,
Yeah.
and it just there are times I've was like, man, I just need a break. I just need a
Right.
break for a while. But I wouldn't want to take a break if I could. I don't think I would. And that whole cycle breaker thing, like my whole family has changed by just seeing, I guess, the light in me. Many many things have changed. Something that was recent that changed was I wrote my dad a letter. And I always knew that he loved me kind of, but it was hard to see at times. And he was a very much an enabler, but he was dealing with his own trauma and he had been manipulated himself. He had perpetrated violence on behalf of my mom. And I wrote him a letter describing how hard my life has been and how traumatic my childhood has been. And I told him at the start, this comes with love and forgiveness. And I repeated that to him a couple of times actually. And at the end of the letter, um, he said, "Thank you for that. It's all true."
Wow.
And then he told me that he wished he had believed me when I told him what had
Oh.
happened when I was 9. And I can't imagine the guilt that he had carried for 40 years or whatever, 35, 40 years. And um he was able to heal because I had done healing and
Hmm.
I brought that forward to him, and then he was able to release that. And he's in his 70s now, and him and I have a great relationship now.
Good. Yeah.
Yeah,
What a gift.
it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, so
And
much.
I also love that your daughter knew, you know, obviously not consciously because she was 3, but she knew, something's going on with dad and he needs me. And she'd go and snuggle in exactly when you needed that.
Yes.
Kids
Um,
are amazing. They pick up on so many things, energetically and subconsciously. A lot of people don't give them credit for, but
I,
you think
I,
you're hiding stuff from them, but nah,
yeah.
they
Oh,
know.
oh no, they know. It goes deeper than that, though. Last year, I had my Akashic records read, and she
Mm.
told me that I had a daughter. I hadn't told her that. And I said, "Yes, I do." And she's like, "You guys have shared many lifetimes." And so, whether you believe in reincarnation or not, but I do. And so I, I see that we have a very close bond. And at some deeper level, she knew,
Mhm.
right? But it's crazy because I had a contractor come into my home last summer and I told him that story. And then he told me the exact same story, except his daughter was 15.
Huh.
And she said, "Dad, I want to come sleep in your room." And he was suicidal, and he wasn't typical man keeping it in, but
Yeah.
somehow at some level there's a knowledge there, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Our kids are connected to us in so many ways that we just don't recognize.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's very special. It's the best.
It
Being a
is.
parent is the best. Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. What advice would you give to somebody who is currently struggling, either just, life's a mess or they're feeling like they want to end it?
There's always a way out. There's hope. There's way out. Find help. Talk to somebody. There's so many resources out there. I think my story is an anomaly. I think most people that reach out get help, and there's always a way. And you'll never, ever regret getting help. I actually have to share another story. So last fall, I did my first speech on mental health, and I was trying to find a way to close it off. I was trying to write this happy ending or whatever. And my daughter, who's now 9, woke up from a nightmare and she wanted cuddles with me. And so I went and crawled into bed with her and I cuddled with her. And as I snuggled in beside her, I remembered those nights all those years ago where her presence had comforted me. And I was just so grateful and honored that now I could comfort her in her time of need. And if you're struggling and you have kids, or even if you're too young, you don't have kids, or whatever it might be, you'll never, ever, ever regret it. Just find a way out, talk to somebody. There's resources all over the place. And that was my problem. I was too scared. And I almost like I knew too much
Yeah.
because, right? Because I'd seen the extreme cases. And
Yeah.
so that's what I just assumed would happen to me. But if you reach out, like, and you're persistent, somebody will help you. There
Yeah.
is there is a champion somewhere in your community. Listen to this podcast, man. Like the stories of coming through the hard times,
Yeah.
right? Maybe
Yeah.
you maybe one of the stories inspires you, right?
Yeah. If we can do it, then you can do it. Anybody can do it. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here today, Laverne, and for sharing your story and inspiring people and helping them through their hard times. I appreciate you.
Thank you for having me, and thank you very much for what you're doing. It's very necessary to talk about the suicide normally without the stigma so
Mhm.
people don't hide from it.
Thank you for listening. Remember that you are loved, you are worthy, you are valuable, you are meant for more, and that it really does get better. If you are in crisis, there are numbers that you can call or text to get the help that you need. That information for Canada and the US is in the description below each episode. If you are in immediate crisis, please call 911. We love you, and I hope you'll listen again.